Okay, so CrowdStrike, your 2026 Global Threat Report describes AI as both an accelerant and a target for cyber attacks. So, just to start with, how are adversaries exploiting generative AI systems today, and why, if it is indeed the case, that why are prompts effectively becoming the new malware?
Yeah, I mean, actually, a lot's changed in the world even just since we've released the global threat report, especially when it comes to AI. But a lot of what we were talking about and what a lot of the warnings we're providing in the release of the report has definitely kind of come into fact recently. Um, the reality is that we have to kind of break it down. AI is such a complex subject. So on one side, we see a lot of organizations wanting to rapidly innovate themselves. They want to be, an organization that's able to compete with their competitors or even out compete their competitors. And for that, a lot of organizations see AI as an opportunity. So we've seen a lot of organizations want to be at the forefront, want to be able to adopt these technologies. But AI is just like any other technology. There's a really good statistic we saw in our report that can really provide some learnings on this. And this is where we've seen huge increase year over year of cloud targeting attacks from criminal organizations, but also nation states. The reason why that's a soft target is because similarly, several years ago, we did the exact same thing with cloud. Organizations ran rapidly to do digital transformation projects, invest heavily in cloud, but they didn't invest security in cloud. And that has become a soft target for them. And when we look into AI, we're making the same mistakes again. We're rapidly wanting to implement these technologies without really understanding how they work within our own organizations. And we're forgetting about security. So we're seeing multiple different things. We're seeing just basically organizations making mistakes and how they've implemented them. We're seeing, again, prompts you mentioned is a great example. We're seeing organizations building these technologies, giving access to a wealth of data without the guardrails and controls, and accidentally having data leaks because the someone's using the prompt, which they think they're supposed to, asking it a question they want to ask, but actually inadvertently getting access to too much information. And just like how organizations want to use AI to innovate themselves, funnily enough, threat actors, they're pretty tech savvy. They like to use the latest and greatest technologies they have available to them. And guess what? They're using AI as well to make their operational capabilities more efficient, be able to do hard tasks more quickly. So it's a really complex landscape right now.
Yeah, and perhaps to that last point, the report highlights that the average e-crime breakout time's fallen to just 29 minutes. I think fastest recorded 27 seconds. So there's a shrinking window. So what does that mean? What's the implication for security teams, and how do they need to, evolve response strategies for to make sure that they can meet these shrinking windows?
Yeah, and this is still, if you look into the average breakout time, that's a lot of data that's taken in over a year period. And we think about how fast the AI technology has been evolving. A lot of the major milestones have been really happened in the last couple of months. So that data is still looking at a lot of threat actors that a year ago were not using AI all the time or were only using bits of AI. That's massively changed. So scarily for us, it's going to see the number next year, how much that's going to decrease with the adoption of AI technologies. But I think it's a really good kind of warning. We know that the threat actors are already very, they're sophisticated, they're very savvy. They have the ability to hit that breakout time in a very small window. Now, what it also means is with AI that we shouldn't think of this as, we'll see a single incident or just decrease. AI has the opportunity for threat actors to run multiple simultaneous attacks against a single organization at speed. So organizations need to be aware that, don't think of dealing with one single security incident. you'll be dealing with potentially hundreds of security incidents simultaneously from a single threat actor. That so much noise. How do you keep up with that speed, but also capacity and scale when dealing with modern threats?
Yeah, and again, that comes on to the fact that the report finds that I think AI-enabled adversaries increased operations by 89% year over year. So as you say, much more activity. So just give us some insight into how exactly the attackers use AI across, but the cyber kill chain from reconnaissance, credential theft, and evasion. What's going on?
Yeah, it really varies. So even from just the very, very upfront side of things, before an adversary typically will start trying to target an organization, they may want to do some reconnaissance and open source intelligence gathering, be able to identify who they should target from a victimology perspective. And that's quite time consuming. That's a lot of research that needs to be done by the threat actor. And guess what? Generative AI tools are fantastic to kind of go through huge amounts of data sets, look at information that is freely available, and be able to summarize that data. We have adversaries frequently using AI tools to be able to customize lures. So everything from the initial emails they may be trying to send to an individual to make it look a lot more authentic. They'll be able to change the language. So we see, just simple things that we probably already use today in our own use of these tools for our own workings. Guess what? They're doing the exact same thing. Again, we have to remember sometimes these actors will get into an organization and maybe there'll be an application, a tool they don't really know or haven't used before, and they'll use the AI tools to be able to understand how to do certain activity. Or we frequently see them creating scripts or programs on the fly for certain tasks. Why spend a couple of hours wasted trying to build your own Go or Python scripts when you can get a generative AI tool to do exactly what you want in 30 seconds and test it and start utilizing it to do some custom exfiltration or custom activities during an actual incident. So again, a lot of what we're seeing is how they can actually minimize the time spent, or if they get any issues, how can they actually get across those problems as quickly as possible. Um, well, again, we've also seen cool things where threat actors are starting to utilize it for vulnerability identification as well.
And the report suggests modern intrusions are increasingly going through, I suppose, a range of things, but I think trusted identities, the SaaS applications, and cloud infrastructure, I think, are highlighted in particular. Why would those environments be more, becoming the preferred routes for attackers? What is it about them that makes it attractive for the attackers?
Yeah, really, we have to remember that, for an enterprise organization, the identity is kind of the key to the business, right? Your employee logs in with their identity, and that allows them access to all the different technologies, all the different services, internal, external, that they need and require to do their job. Organizations have massively evolved over the last several years. Previously we would think that all of our data sits in a data center or in an office somewhere. That's not true anymore. If you think about it, majority of organizations have data sprawled all over the place. They're using SaaS applications, they're using data analytics platforms. They'll have data stored on a file share or file system internally, but also externally in another place as well. So the adversary is very aware of the new technology landscape that most enterprise organizations have. They understand how enterprise organizations are set up, probably even better than the organizations themselves. And they realized, probably a couple of years ago that actually an organization's most sensitive data probably doesn't sit in a data center in an office. It sits in a SaaS application, as an example. So for them, it's very important that they move rapidly and wide across an organization. So this is where, again, the identity is that key. The identity allows the employee, as such, if a threat actor gets access to that identity, it gives them the key to have free reign and free flow across all these different domains. This becomes challenging for cybersecurity defenders because, again, we go back to that cloud example. Traditionally, as organizations have adopted new technologies, they've forgotten about security. So what we see is as organizations start moving to SaaS applications, they don't have visibility into who has access to it. They don't have visibility of permissions or guardrails. They don't have access to understanding how maybe someone's jumping between all these different domains. The visibility is just not there. And what we have to realize is as we adopt new technology, security has to grow with that adoption. Security shouldn't be an afterthought because unfortunately, the adversary, the threat actor, be it nation state or e-crime, they're aware of that gap and they're aware of that visibility loss that organizations have. And they unfortunately use it against those businesses that get victimized.
Yeah, and in terms of that nation state piece, I think the activity, the report highlights that the activity linked to China and North Korea surged in 2025. I guess we've got things like Fancy Bear, as it infamous Chalima, that adopting these AI enabled tactics. So just give us some oversight as to how nation state actors are integrating AI into their cyber operations to make themselves more effective, I guess.
Yeah, some very varying, some very low sophisticated to high sophisticated. So, everything from creating custom laws again to in specific languages or changing the content based on, topical events happening. If you look into nation state, it's typically going to be intelligence gathering for very specific, geopolitical changes or tensions. So being able to adopt and create laws on the fly based on certain events that may be occurring can be extremely useful for a nation state. And then on the other side, we saw, Russian, backed threat actors creating tools that harness artificial intelligence to create custom commands and create custom capabilities on the fly. So without having to build this overly complex, exploit or backdoor, they're able just to create a backdoor that has AI built in and be able to give commands on the fly of what they wanted to do. By utilizing, in this case, it was using a tool called the Hugging Face API, which has access to a multitude of different AI tools, and it allowed it to basically create those commands on the fly based on the needs and the requirements. So again, we're starting to see a huge evolution and change of where AI is actually embedded into these tools. In this case, it was using a third-party API and AI capability, which was basically a Chinese AI model, but what we will see is a huge shift as actually bringing AI models closely to the endpoint. So in the future, we can see these actors using AI models that we already have built into our endpoint through our operating systems or other tools to do all this locally, which could be extremely, again, difficult for defenders to identify. But then you also raised quite an interesting one. North Korea has a very sophisticated threat actor capability. And we see them doing it for very different reasons. Famous Chalima is a really interesting group of individuals to understand where they are targeting that they're a nation state targeting organizations and businesses but not for intellectual property theft or intelligence gathering. It's to gain money for the regime, and this is where they are basically getting jobs in organizations, faking personas, getting a role in that organization, and using that salary to fund the regime. But more sinister, they're there to steal intellectual property to blackmail the organization or to sell that data off elsewhere, again, to gain money for the regime. And as you could probably guess, it's probably quite hard for a North Korean threat actor to be able to try and get a job in a Western organization. Their personas get caught, so they have to refresh them. they use AI. They use AI to try and masquerade voices, masquerade their videos. They use AI to help them with the interview questions, responding to CVs or responding to job applications. They use AI on the job to make it look like they're doing the job and trying to make sure that they don't get identified as being well, firstly, a bad employee, but also, secondly, a North Korean threat actor. So, again, for them, they want to be able to try and get as much of that salary as possible. So, just being okay at their job is kind of their goal and focus, and AI tools allow them to do that. So, again, it's a really interesting situation here, but this is a real life nation state threat actor that's actively targeting European businesses today. And it may not be in the same traditional themes. They're coming through your HR department versus through trying to steal identities, but it's still bringing a malicious insider into your organization who has ill intent.
Yeah, so in terms of those AI generated persona, I mean, how you've explained in detail there what's going on, but I mean, how convincing are that, are there still sort of fairly obvious clues? Because in the early days, often there are, if you know what you're looking for, it's quite easy to, and then as the sophistication improves, it gets less. So where are we with these AI-driven identities? How convincing are they at the moment? And is there a worry that they will become, sufficiently convincing that they will be difficult to spot over time?
So convincing that we frequently still see it happening on a regular basis, and it's a truly an issue that organizations need to be aware of. There's always going to be opportunity to mitigate it, and I think this is a really good example where cybersecurity doesn't just sit with the security teams of an organization. Where we've seen organizations being able to identify this is when the security teams have spent time with their HR, spent times with their employment teams and worked with them just so they actually aware of it. What should they be looking into from a CV perspective? What should they be looking for during the initial interview question processes? By being aware of this problem, um, a lot of the cybersecurity teams have actually been able to mitigate this problem at the early stage of the kind of the CV application process, just by educating other teams to look out for this and be aware of it. So again, I think this is just a really good example of where cybersecurity shouldn't be a silo. It actually can be really beneficial to get the help of other or parts of your organization, especially when we talk about famous Chalima, because it touches so many different parts of the business.
And the report also says that I think it's just under half, or about 42% vulnerabilities exploited before public disclosure, alongside this major increase in cloud-focused intrusions, which I think we referenced already. But what are the biggest weaknesses organizations still have in the cloud, and also their, vulnerability management strategies?
Yeah, so from the cloud perspective, again, it's about making sure cybersecurity is actually part of that deployment. For a lot of organizations, they don't have visibility in the first place. They don't understand how maybe, someone might be accessing that cloud environment maliciously. So really, it's about, taking everything you've done from, if you've got other parts of your organization that you're proud of from a cybersecurity perspective, making sure you've got a parity of capabilities across all of your tech stack. So, what you've done on your end user compute, you need to make sure you're replicating it as close as possible onto your cloud estates as well. And I think that's first of all. But then when you talk about the vulnerability management side of things, that is extremely important today. We've seen new frontier AI models being released in the news continuously at the moment. You have Anthropic with Mythos, you have OpenAI with their GPT, I think it's 4.5 dash cyber. These are frontier models that are designed specifically for security use cases, and they're more focused on vulnerability identification. So, we are going to see a huge increase in the amount of vulnerabilities organizations need to remediate. And of course, when we see a huge increase in vulnerabilities, we see, threat actors wanting to use these vulnerabilities to target organizations. And we talked about, the increase in 0 days, but we also kind of forget about it's a huge increase in the amount of threat actors that will take a vulnerability that has been made public. So there's a patch, so people can actually patch against this vulnerability. They will reverse engineer it, understand what the actual vulnerability is, and then build an exploit for that vulnerability. Even though there's a patch for it, they know that most organizations find it very difficult or very slow to actually patch their systems that are vulnerable. That's not going to be possible going forward. So, really what we see today is a good, warning call for organizations to make sure they have a very efficient patch management and vulnerability management process. It's going to be paramount just because we're going to see a huge influx potentially over, the next couple of years as these technologies allow organizations to identify vulnerabilities quicker. But again, by identifying those vulnerabilities, they make them public, and organizations need to make sure that they are not vulnerable to it.
Yeah, and I guess if there is a conclusion from the report or one of the sort of high level findings that we're entering, I think it says, cybersecurity is entering an AI arms race. So you've got the enterprises want to leverage AI defensively, but that's merely, or I say merely, but important to keep pace with the increasingly automated and intelligent adversaries. So I won't ask you who's winning out at the moment, or I mean, you can tell me if you want, but just how delicately balanced is the sort of AI for good versus the AI for bad at the moment?
I would say there's probably more towards the good. It depends on the organizations really coming down to it, right? So, if you're an organization that decides not to adopt and adapt to new technology, you may find yourself, losing against the AI arms race. Um, we have to also remember that this is not a technology that just suddenly began a few weeks ago. It's a technology that has been evolved in many different forms for a number of years. Cybersecurity has been one of those sectors that has always been very open to the use of, data science, machine learning, AI, and it's in a really good place of understanding of where these types of technologies, because we are dealing with such amount of data and nuance and changing landscapes, where these technologies are really, really useful for us. So we've been adopting them for quite some time. But I think we need organizations to use this opportunity, use this time to go, well, how do we, invest in our security operations team? How do we change how we deal with incidents? So rather than opening a ticket, dealing with an incident, closing it, we should be understanding of how do we take that human and maybe they are, rather than opening tickets and closing them, they are, allowing AI to do a lot of that work for them, and they're just basically feeding in the learnings, the iterations, the remediations, the recommendations, rather than just opening and closing tickets. So again, I think it's a great opportunity. We can really upscale security teams with the technology we have available to us. It's bringing more and more great technology into the cybersecurity defense world. But again, I think we need to make sure that organizations are adopting it because, the adversary is.
And maybe just looking further ahead, clearly AI is the focus now, but um, I won't say hardly a day passes, but yeah, I get a lot of information about post-quantum cryptography and what happens there. Did you have any thoughts as to, if the AI situation now is shall we say stressful enough, what happens in when quantum computing, if you like, comes mainstream? Does that cause a whole new level of sort of pain and another arms race for good and bad, or just your thoughts, I suppose, as to what quantum computing might bring with it?
Again, it can be quite hard you don't want to lose focus in cybersecurity because again, there's so much real things happening that are could be detrimentally damaging to organizations today, and it's already heavily complex. But at the same time, well, from a strategy perspective, you need to be aware of where things are changing. I still think we've got a few more years, so I think we've got a bit more time to kind of concentrate on the AI problem. And then once we've got that sorted, maybe we need to start focusing on quantum computing. But again, it's if you're not thinking about it, probably start getting an idea of how to kind of maybe update your own internal organization to quantum safe encryption and so forth. You may not need to do it today, but starting to have a plan put forward in the next for the next few years could be extremely beneficial.
And maybe just finally, are you an optimist when it comes to this the tension between the bad actors and what's possible to guard against, or do you worry that at some stage something sort of so horrendous will happen that it'll cause everyone to sort of slightly rethink the idea of the digital world we live in and all the connectedness which gives these folks chance to get up to the no good.
I think I'm definitely an optimist. There's a huge amount of benefits of the interconnected world we have, and we've seen huge evolutions of our technology, and so many advancements out of it. Um, what I will say is that although we talk about cybersecurity, there's a lot of doom and gloom. There's a lot of, you may see a news article of an organization being breached or hacked. What you don't see is the organizations that are defending their countries, their companies, their employees, their customers' data every single day. So for every one incident you hear in the news, there's hundreds of thousands of incidents that never really happened because organizations were able to defend themselves from these types of attacks. I think there's a lot of goodness, unfortunately, we don't talk about, and a lot of great successes that we just don't talk about. But at the same time, if you're an organization or work in an organization and you don't feel that you're able to keep up with these what's going to happen or what's happening today, then the best thing to do is get prepared. Call for help. Use organizations like CrowdStrike. Um, it's such a fast moving pace and fast moving world that having the idea of having the ability to do this yourself is just not possible. So use things like shared services, use the people who are dealing with every single day to kind of augment your team or augment your ideas, support you in becoming more prepared.
Excellent. Well, been great to chat, and thank you so much for sharing some great insights into what's going on in a fast-moving world with AI adding a layer of complexity, shall we say? But Zeki, really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.